When I was a kid, our family took a yearly vacation, normally in the car. And frankly, when I was a kid, I was really quite whiny. I had three older sisters, and maybe that's what made me whiny, I don't know for sure. But for years, my sisters reminded me of what I often said as we took those vacations in the car. And in the car back then, I know some of you won't remember days like this, but they were often not air-conditioned cars, and there were 6 of us in the family, and we were all in the same car. And frequently I would say, "Oh, I'm so hot and sweaty. Oh, I'm so hot and sweaty." I would whine and whine about being hot and sweaty. I'll admit that I had as a child what psychologists call low frustration tolerance. I got easily frustrated. So, what I'm about to share with you must be understood in light of my low frustration tolerance. On one of our vacation trips, we left the state of Ohio and headed up to the big state of Michigan, ending up in the city known as Grand Rapids. Well, it was a Sunday, I remember, and Bill was so hungry. And you know what? We couldn't find any restaurants open in Grand Rapids. It was a Sabbath, I was told. Well, I didn't care. I was hungry, and if you know me, I don't like to be hungry. I like to eat. And the only memory I had of our trip to Grand Rapids was that those Grand Rapidians kept me from eating. And all because some religious people wanted to honor the Sabbath. Now, we were religious people, good conservative Lutherans, but we ate on Sundays. Sabbath keeping has been a topic for Jews and Christians forever. The Bible establishes the pattern of Sabbath keeping. In Deuteronomy today, we are given the second listing of the 10 Commandments in the Bible. And this second recitation is straightforward in its instruction. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. Exodus, where we get the first listing of the 10 Commandments, says you are to remember the Sabbath. Well, Deuteronomy moves it up a notch. Deuteronomy says you are to observe the Sabbath. That is, you're supposed to practice it. It's supposed to be a regular part of your week. And this is no suggestion, it is a command. Do it every week. Set aside one day, and for the Jews, that day was Saturday. Set aside one day for rest. Yeah, you should work. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. So life is not about taking it easy all the time. No, work and work hard, but also rest. The 7th day is to be a Sabbath to the Lord your God. The word Sabbath comes from a word that means to cease. You are to cease one day a week. Marva Dawn says that Sabbath keeping involves ceasing work, productivity, and accomplishment, ceasing anxiety, worry, and tension, ceasing our possessiveness, ceasing our trying to be God. And I have to admit, I don't cease very well. I am an accomplisher. I am not very good at being unproductive. And frankly, I probably get a whole lot more done than most of you do in a short period of time. So la-di-da. Cease? Seriously? The 7th day is to be a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male or female slave or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or any of the immigrants in your town. Sounds like everyone gets a break, even your cows. It's fascinating to me. Can you imagine? All right, listen, Elsie, you get the day off. You don't have to produce any milk today. But the point is clear. Everything and everybody deserves a break. Now, why this command? Why keep the Sabbath? Oh, and I know what you're going to say. Some of you, at least, have read parts of the Bible, the beginning part of the Bible. You're going to say, because God made the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And if God needed to rest, then we and everything else should rest. Rest is built into creation, you are going to say, and that's right. And that's what Genesis says and what Exodus says, but that's not what Deuteronomy says today. According to the second giving of the law, you practice Sabbath because you remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Sabbath, you see, and you got to get this, Sabbath is about liberation. It's about freedom. God sets you free, and you know what it's like not to be free. You know what it's like to work all the time. Therefore, you will not work all the time, and you will not treat people like you were treated. You're not going to make other people and even your animals work all the time. And it's not just rich people who are going to get vacations, and that's what the case was in ancient days. It's not just rich people who are going to get vacations. Everybody's going to get a weekend. Everybody's going to get time off. Sabbath, you see, in Deuteronomy is about social justice. Sabbath is about freedom from that which oppresses. Life in God is not about oppression. Life in God is about freedom, which I think is what Jesus is trying to teach us in these two marvelous stories out of Mark about the Sabbath. And many people think that Jesus was anti-law, that he was anti-Sabbath. And I can understand that in light of the two Sabbath controversy stories that we have in Mark today. Jesus' disciples are working on the Sabbath. They're traveling and picking grain. That's the problem. They're traveling and picking grain. They're gleaning on the Sabbath. And the crabby people come up and make a big fuss. His disciples aren't ceasing. They are working. Now, Jesus, and he's such a good argumenter, a person who can argue well, he says there's a precedent in the Bible for what his disciples are up to. David, the one who became king, your king, by the way, and his companions violated the law when they ate the bread of the presence, which only the high people, the priests, are supposed to eat. They ate it. Why? Because they were hungry. Remember that Grand Rapidians. Bill was hungry. More important than a strict adherence to a rigidly understood rule is human need, Jesus is saying. The Sabbath was made for humankind and humankind, not for the Sabbath. If observing the Sabbath is about freedom, then it doesn't make a lot of sense to turn the command into a means for keeping people bound up. It doesn't make sense to turn a gift into a prison. I like what Matt Skinner says. The proper function of the Sabbath is to promote life and extol God as liberator. I don't think Jesus is against the Sabbath. I think he is opposed to squeezing the very gift, the very life out of a great gift. And this is what religious people do far too often. We take a gift and we turn it into a club to beat other people up, or a noose we hang around our necks and create all kinds of unnecessary guilt for ourselves. But even because religious people do this does not mean the gift is not important. And today, I am going to recommend the gift to you today. And I'm speaking to all of you, and I'm speaking to those of you who are graduating as well. I believe that our lack of Sabbath is doing great harm to us, to our land, to our political dialogue. You and I live in a world in which the boundaries around work have almost disappeared. If our work is done mostly by computers, we can work 24 hours a day. Emails, texts, social media, they all can be done whenever. And I am convinced that is potentially harmful for our mental and our physical health. And I believe, and I'm not sure about this, I haven't seen any studies on this, I think it has a harmful impact upon our work. I am not persuaded, and again, this is just my opinion, that being able to work all the time increases productivity. In fact, I've seen that sometimes it reduces it. Now, I'm known for saying on occasion that many people in the modern era, especially in middle and upper middle America, often have more money than they have time. So many people from our kinds of backgrounds are bound up by time, something the church can tell you is true. We obsessively fill time with activity, often neglecting the very things we value. How often do we say or do we hear, "I don't have time for that, I'm much too busy." Many of our kids are scheduled to death, and play has to be scheduled sometimes for young kids. A wonderful young woman from our church, when asked by me recently what she likes to do for fun, said, "Well, I don't have time for fun." Time tyrannizes us far too often. 24-hour work, 24-hour news. When can our brains stop the anxiety that comes from being exposed to the craziness of our world? We can worry about the world, and I'm one of them, 24 hours a day. And by the way, we also can shop 24 hours a day. A click of the mouse can get us the latest consumer product even at 3 o'clock in the morning. And you don't think we need Sabbath. We badly need Sabbath. We badly need to cease. We badly need to step away from anxiety and consumerism. We badly need to play and pray, as Eugene Peterson describes the tasks of Sabbath keeping. We badly need to remember that life doesn't ultimately depend upon us. And that, in my opinion, is the primary significance of Sabbath keeping, no matter how you do it, whether you set aside one day or you set aside time during the day. But here is the primary significance of the Sabbath. The Sabbath reminds us that life gets along very well without all of our work, all of our anxiety, all of our buying, our filling every moment with unending activity. You might note in the first creation story in Genesis, the author says, after the creative activity of each day, there was evening and morning. The first day, the second day, the third day, there was evening and morning. Ancient Jews, this is so profound, ancient Jews viewed the starting of the day as beginning with evening, the time when we are starting to produce less, starting to nod off, heading toward bed, the time when we are losing control of the day. The day, you see, in Genesis begins not with us, not by our grabbing it by the horns and moving forward with power and control. The day begins with the activity of God. And here is the secret to Sabbath keeping. Life begins with and is sustained by God, a gracious God, a God who desires to set us free from all the stuff that wants to oppress us, including time. Sabbath keeping is a gracious way to remember that it is not all about you. You can play, you can pray, you don't have to do every sport. Your house doesn't have to be perfectly clean. And maybe, and I'm just sharing this with the graduates and nobody else is hearing this, and maybe you don't even have to get all A's on all your papers. You don't have to work so long and so hard that you become crabby with everybody else. You can set aside a day, an hour, a week, just to goof off, to hang out with friends, having absolutely no agenda except to enjoy life. Can Sabbath keeping become a problem? Oh, of course. We live in West Michigan. We know how this works. Human beings are particularly adept at turning a gift into a burden. But frankly, I got to say to you folks, that is not your problem. And if it is, knock it off. You will be violating the very essence of the Sabbath by using it to beat yourself and other people up. The Sabbath is about freedom. And I join with Dr. Martin Luther King in saying, let freedom ring. Amen.